The business had lost more than half the annual revenue. $12 million a year down to $5 million. I'd like to say that crisis clarified everything immediately, but it didn't. What it did was remove the conditions that had allowed me to avoid harder questions. You see, when the structure around you collapses, you'll lose the ability to hide behind it. And what I found beneath all of that wasn't a strategic problem. It was personal. You see, I had built the first version of the company around me, around my centrality. Every whiteboard session I led, every brainstorm I was in the middle of, every strategic conversation ran through me. And I told myself that I was just facilitating, when in reality, I was just controlling everything. The ceiling of every session was my own thinking. And I made sure we hit it. The team was capable, but their output was limited to me because I knew where we should go before we even began, and I made sure we got there. It was full throttle control dressed up in collaboration. When the revenue tanked, I had to ask myself a question that I had never seriously considered or asked myself. Whether a company built around one person's judgment, one person's presence, and one person's need to be central was structurally vulnerable in ways that I really hadn't considered or examined up to that point. And so when I looked at it in that lens, the answer was yes. And that realization, it didn't produce a strategy, it produced a reckoning. And before I could rebuild the business, I had to answer 4 questions that I already thought I knew the answer to. And it took the most intense 48 hours of my professional life to wake me up to the fact that I really didn't know the answers. And that was the key to my solution. And the first was the hardest. Who are you? Not my title, not my function, not the role I was performing inside the business. You see, if you're no longer the smartest person in the room, the one everyone turns to, the one that all of these important moments require, what remains? What's left? Who are you then? You see, I had so fused my identity with that of the business, my value, my utility. The business success was my success. The business failure was my failure. I took all of those as personal things, not the business. Being needed wasn't just how I contributed. It's how I understood my own value. And until I separated those two things, then I was going to continue building a business that confirmed my importance, rather than building a business that could outlast my involvement. Now, the second question is, why are you here? What was my purpose? Was I building this company to fulfill a mission? Or was I building it in a way that kept feeding my own significance? Because see, those aren't the same thing. And for longer than I wanted to admit, I had been doing the second, while saying and telling myself that I was doing the first. If my mission was real, then my job was not to be in the center of it. My job was to build something that was stronger than my own presence. And the third question was, what do you actually want? Scale or significance? Now, most founders say scale, but what many of them mean is they want scale without surrendering the center. They don't want to give up control. They want the business to be growing, but they still want that to orbit around them. I look back now, that's what I wanted. I liked that it was orbiting around me. It made me feel important. It made me feel needed. And I had built the culture that way. And then I found myself sitting in the wreckage of that. And at some point you have to choose, because the business will eventually force that question. The first 3 questions expose the truth. The fourth forced an action. Are you willing to build around the honest answers? Not conceptually, not as leadership philosophy, in practice, real ownership transferred to other people, real risk, real potential for loss, real decisions made without your involvement. Rooms built for leaders to think, act, and decide, and room to grow without running it through you first. Your value measured not in how often you're needed, but how well things run when you're not there. Answering those 4 questions honestly is what changed what I was willing to build. And that changed everything else. It changed who I was able to recruit. You see, when your identity dependent on remaining the most capable person in the room, you unconsciously begin filtering out people who might outperform you. You actually start looking for them. You make room for a level of talent that previously you might have found threatening without even knowing it. This new team wasn't just more skilled. It was built under a whole different set of conditions. Conditions where I was genuinely looking to build something that didn't require me to be at the center to function. And that's a different frame that I'd ever been working from. And the proof came quietly. We were hosting a strategy session with some of our top field leaders from all over the country coming in. And it's the kind of room that I'd always led. And my team suggested that they run it without me, and not as some test or some symbolic gesture, but it just simply made sense. I mean, they were ready. It was their process. It was their work. And my presence would have changed that dynamic in ways that would really have hurt the outcome. And as I sat in my office, just a few feet away from the conference room where they were meeting, I hadn't anticipated what that would feel like. Not nervousness or anxiety about their performance, because I trusted them. They were professionals, so they were very good at what they were doing. But what surfaced was something that was much quieter and a lot older than that. The feeling of being in the room, the feeling of being the one the room required, the one that had the best read, the one that knew best how to get the most out of all the people in that room, the person whose presence changed what was possible inside of that room, that had been feeding something in me that I had never fully examined. And sitting outside that room, for the first time, I felt its absence. It felt like loss. I felt alone. I felt deprived. And not because anything was wrong, but because something I had been drawing from for years was no longer being reinforced. The role that I had confused with my identity was now being performed by other people. People that I had developed, people that I had trained in a room that I had the wisdom to stay out of. The grief was real. But so was the feeling that something that had been limiting the business for all of these years was beginning to release its grip. Now the session ended. They ran it well. In fact, better than well. They crushed it. What I had rebuilt out of crisis took honest self-examination on my part, a new team, a new set of conditions to produce something that the original version of the business never could have. And it's not because the people that we had now were necessarily more talented, although, there was some of that. But really it was because the people that we had were now being given actual room to lead. Because I had stopped filling every available space with my own presence and calling it contribution. Now, my skills didn't become less relevant to the business or to its success. They became relevant, but at a different level. Now, instead of doing everything, it was about designing the system, developing the leaders, shaping the direction, raising the standard. And so the insight didn't disappear. It just stopped being needed in every room in order to matter. The company stopped orbiting around my ego and started building around a culture of leadership. And that's when we 5x'd our business in 3 years. So if you're a founder and everything still runs through you, look deeper than your structure. Look deeper than your strategy and ask yourself, what are you drawing from it? Not what are you contributing, because you already know the answer to that, but what is getting fed in you when you're the one with all the answers? What does it cost you emotionally when the room doesn't need you? Whether you're building a business that's genuinely designed for scale, or whether or not you're building a business that just confirms that you're the one that the business can't do without. Because that question, it isn't strategic, it's personal. And until you answer it honestly, you won't delegate. You'll just delegate the work and call it leadership. The business will scale to exactly the level your ego can tolerate and no further. Now, I worked through this process during one of the most difficult moments in our company's history. And if you want to have a conversation of what that would look like in your business, reach out to me. I'm glad to walk through it with you.